Welcome to A Woman's Heart. Today we have Jill Eileen Smith, and she is going to officially kick off our summer reading series. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jill.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa.
You are welcome. As I mentioned before we started the official recording, I am looking forward to being able to speak with you and several other fiction writers for all of the things that you have gone through, learning from you and learning from your stories. And I love losing myself in a book and a story and all that. But before we get into that, I would love to get to know you a little better, let my listeners get to know you a little better. So tell us something about yourself, and I like to ask for something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
Oh, that's hard. I'm not a fun person, no.
Oh, I don't believe that.
I'm just kidding. Well, I have been married to my best friend. It'll be 48 years this May. Yeah,
Congratulations.
I was a young bride, so you know.
Yeah, you were five. I get it.
Of course. Yeah. We have three adult sons and some lovely daughters-in-law and four grandchildren. We don't get to see them often. They live on the West Coast, but
Mm.
we have enjoyed babysitting when we can, and we go out there as often as possible. And I hope they move back, but I also love the West Coast, so
Yeah,
there's that. It's just kind of far from Michigan, but
yeah,
the fun, oh, I have.
it is.
We have cats. We moved 3 years ago. I guess that to me it's fun. I don't know about my readers would think, but we used to live all our lives in a suburb where you've got your house right next door and a
Mhm.
house behind you, and it's kind of normal. Raised our kids there, and after they left and my husband's retired, and I was like, well, we both wanted to be downsizing, although this is a little smaller. I still need more closets, but you know. Um,
We all do at times.
yeah, yeah. We moved to a quiet little neighborhood, a little more rural, and we get to visit with the cranes come knocking on our door sometimes. In fact, the other morning we heard this knocking. I wasn't out of bed yet, and I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
we have a glass door wall. It's what it's called in
Mhm.
Michigan. It's like sliding door.
Okay.
And if there's no food out there because the deer ate it all the night before, then the sand crane comes to the door and scratches his nose or taps his nose on the door trying to wake us up like, is the restaurant open?
Oh
Are
my.
you feeding me? But we get ducks, we've had an opossum, we get birds. I love cardinals. They don't come often enough. We get all
Oh,
kinds of
yes.
birds in the summer. We get bunnies. The cranes don't like the ducks. The deer don't like the cats in our house that like to Cody liked to fly at the window and scare them. Now he just like, there's deer out there. So but I'm always every time I look, they want to run away. But that's brings us joy, fun and
Yeah.
being with family and friends and laughing and playing games and yeah,
Yeah. No, I think that's really funny that the crane comes up and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, you are out of food. I need to be fed now." It's
exactly. And if you are up and he happens to walk by and there's no food, we might as well go do it. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, yeah, yeah. There's a crane near, well, I would say somewhat near me if I take a walk. And I always like the image of them, standing in the middle of the swirling water and they're just so incredibly still. And to me, that's such a picture of peace, of how
mm,
everything can be swirling around them and they're just very still, just watching and waiting. And
yeah.
yeah, so it's
They
always
can
to me.
stand even in a storm. Like if it's
Yeah.
windy, they've got these stick legs, but it doesn't knock them over. I'm like, God is so creative. And he
Yes.
sent the most beautiful sunsets over here. We never
Mm.
had them as pretty in the other house we were in. So I really enjoy the peace and the beauty.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a beautiful spot, even with the very hungry crane knocking at your door
Yes,
early in the morning. So I love that.
yes.
So, well, you are a rather prolific writer. You have lots and lots of books to choose from. And I am kind of curious, how did you become a fiction writer? What was that journey like? Did you always want to write, or there are some people that are like they're more of a reluctant, obedient writer? Um,
I'm probably somewhere in between. I'm not
okay.
usually never normal, but yeah. No, I got into writing. I always journaled
Okay.
since probably my teens. I journaled.
Hmm.
I wrote one short story in high school, but I wasn't a writer seeking to write. When I was older and had my first one or two kids, I can't remember now. A girlfriend and I co-taught a Bible study on the life of King David. And at that time, we were talking the late 80s. So I'd read all the biblical fiction out there pretty much because there wasn't that much of it. I wanted to read a novel on his life, though. So I started looking, thinking, well, there's other novels, right? So I looked and couldn't find one that I wanted, it didn't satisfy me. There was one, and it was like, no. So I started to write the book I wanted to read, and I didn't know what I was doing. And 20 years later, that became the Wives of King David series. But I had a lot of ups and downs and starts and stops. And I wrote you could combine about 8 novels in different genres before the first book ever sold. So it's kind of like I tell people that want to write, don't think your first book's going to be the one that sells. It does to some people, but
Hmm. For
not
some, maybe.
most of us. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is not the norm.
Don't be quick to self-publish your first book either, because that you need a lot. It's like learning to play the piano. And just because you can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars doesn't mean you can play Mozart. So you need to practice and practice. And that's what writing is.
Yeah.
Practice, practice, practice. So it
Yeah.
was a long journey, but it was a good one. It was one I knew God had opened the doors in remarkably and amazing ways when it finally happened. But boy, did it take a long time to wait.
Oh, yeah. Well, and along those lines, what were some of those obstacles, or did you have lies that you were kind of hearing and had to overcome to persist and just kind of know that this is what you wanted to do? You just needed to keep going. What were some of those obstacles or lies that you had to overcome to keep going?
I'm stubborn. Maybe it's the German in me. I don't know. I just, I never give up.
All
I
right.
mean, I get close. I can get really discouraged and, want to.
Mm-hmm.
Was with among other writers that were saying, you get rejections, so kick the cabinet and send it out again. So that was the thinking that I had. I kept trying. I had written a 2-volume epic on the life of David, not knowing what I was doing. Sent it out 28 times, had one publisher read it, tell me they weren't interested, and stuck it under a shelf, which it's now shredded, I'm pretty sure. So that's good because no one needs to read that. But I started homeschooling my boys and wasn't really spending time at that. The year they were going to all be in school, they all came home. And so my writing career got put on hold. I did spend 5 years writing one book and learning point of view, but as all this time, it was always learning because it went from like, I did it all backwards. Let's write the book. And so I should have been writing articles or
Okay.
small stuff, get your feet wet. I kept a blog going and I would interview authors. And I attended conferences and I taught piano to afford conferences. And, but it was a process of just keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. I had 3 different agents, finally got to, and you can only have one at a time. So I finally
I
got
figured it wasn't all at once.
no, no. I had one for a year, one for 2 years, and then I was without one. I went to a conference with both two books. One was romantic suspense and one was McCall. And my she's now my agent, loved McCall, but biblical fiction by that point was really hard to sell. And everything I wrote was hard to sell because I had raised 3 boys. I always liked writing the male point of view. My characters were heroes, not heroines, and most women wanted to
Okay.
read about women more than men at that time. I'm not sure if that's changed, but so I had to learn to like girls. I mean, I'm a girl, but I didn't have a girl, and now I have
Yes.
granddaughters. I love girls, but it was back then that was different. So I learned how to
Yeah.
like the female point of view, and but I had to learn to switch it all. Anyway, I had gotten to a point where my now agent had several books in her of mine, and she tried, but she found out McCall had been around the Christian market block too many times because more
Right.
than one agent had tried to sell it. She told me that around June, she was going to shelve it for a while. But or maybe it was May. In July, she was going to a sales thing and she was going to promote my suspense. And I was like standing in the mirror doing my hair one day saying, Lord, are you ever going to do anything with the Wives of David? Because that was my heart. That was it's what I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I had written back in June in my journal that I was going to give my agent one more year. And if she couldn't sell anything, I was at the point I was actually going to quit. I truly was. I thought I was on the wrong path. I wasn't giving God like a
An ultimatum.
no, not at all. It was like, if this is the wrong path, show me what I should do because I don't know how to do anything else
Yeah.
except teach piano, and I don't like it that much. I'm not that good at it. It's like I can teach beginners, but that was not my thing. So, um, then was going to propose this other book in July, but come August, she went to a conference in Oregon where an editor sat next to her and told her she was looking for biblical fiction and it was coming back. And this was back in 2007. Now, remember, it was
Oh.
popular in the 80s. That's how long a time it wasn't popular
Ah,
because only people well known could write it that already had an established career, like Francine Rivers or Angela Hunt, but not me.
yeah.
I was nobody. So, but Ravel wanted the series, and here we are. You
There
know,
you go.
now there's tons of people writing it. But then I found that journal that December where I had given the Lord that, show me what I should do.
Mm-hmm.
By that point, I had my contract and went, wow. I mean, how I fa managed to find that journal, because I have tons of them,
Oh,
and
yeah.
to that prayer, but I did, and I think he was just trying to show me that he's faithful, and I
Mm-hmm.
just have to wait. And you always have to go at anything with a surrendered heart. If you
Yeah.
don't, I had to, even while they were discussing it in committee, I gave it back to God with whatever your will is, I surrender this to you. If he didn't want it, I didn't want it. And then they did. And so it's kind of, wow.
Yeah,
But
no. Well, and that kind of answers one of the questions that I had is what are some of the things that have surprised you along the way? And the fact that you find this journal entry and that all worked out, that was a very happy surprise. Or, kind of somewhat starting to head into the book about Mary. When you're writing these stories, does God frequently, maybe you have one thing in mind, but then you realize that God has something else in mind, and he surprises you with some things that you learn in the process of writing your books.
sometimes, most of the time, it's painful. I hate first drafts. And depending on the book, it can be please, God, give me a scene every time I sit down to write. Help me to figure out what to write next. That's what
Mhm.
I'm doing right now. It's what I did with Rebecca. I prayed over every scene in that book because I thought there was no story. But then there's moments like Abigail, and I was writing her story and I was going through something in my life and went, I wonder if Abigail felt this way in this
Hmm.
thing she was going through because it was a similar feeling, different circumstance. But
Okay.
I'd have these little aha moments with some of the characters in past books. Others are just plain hard. One book I turned in and pulled back, had to rewrite the ending, I brainstormed on the phone for 3 hours with an author in another state to figure out what was wrong with the book because I knew I didn't want my editor to see it till I'd fixed it. That's only happened once, so.
Okay. Very, very good. Well, and when you're writing, how do your heart has been originally with the wives of David, and then you've gone on and do that. And I told you I've enjoyed the short ones about some of the wives of
Mhm.
Solomon, and I love how you put in the description that he was supposed to be one of the wisest rulers. Just how smart is it to have 700 wives and 300 concubines from all from like I don't think that's very wise, but you meant he's a very complicated character, and some other ones that you have tackled, I'm sure, are complicated as well. Your latest one is Dawn of Grace, and it's Mary Magdalene's story. And I think she's a very well-known figure, but I think she can very easily be confused with other characters, and there's a lot going on there. So, why did you want to write her story? What led you to write her story?
Well, the honest answer is I ran out of Old Testament women. I didn't know what to do next because so there's some I haven't done, but I didn't want to do them, you
Hmm.
know. And so then it was like, okay, can we go into the New Testament? But that had always intimidated me because of having to learn a whole new era. I mean, I
Yeah.
I was used to ancient past or going back so far, nobody had any history on it, like Daughter of Eden, you know. We weren't
Hmm.
there at the garden.
Yeah.
So, you can't verify it as much, and you don't get letters saying, this wasn't that way, or that did happen early in my career where I was questioned on a few things, but I had found the answer earlier, so
Okay.
it wasn't, but with Mary, it was like there was a lot of false history on her
Mm.
that people believe. People think she was a prostitute. Some people, because there was a pope back in the 1600s, it's in the back of the book, that
Yeah.
combined women in the Bible and made it Mary Magdalene because they were an unnamed sinner that wept at Jesus' feet, or they assumed she was a prostitute, which it never says. The only thing it says is she had seven demons cast out of her, and that she was followed Jesus devotedly, and she was at the tomb. She supported him from her means, and we don't know anything else than that. But
Hmm.
people like to make it up like she was married to Jesus. Why? Because she clung to him at his, maybe clung to his feet or something when she
Yeah.
saw him alive? No. So the history that people want to throw at her might come from the Gnostic Gospels or something, but it's not from the biblical accounts that we read in the canon that's been accepted for generations. So,
Yeah. Well, and I imagine how challenging was it? Because nowadays, I think back in biblical times, it was, I guess, for lack of a better term, accepted for the idea of being possessed.
mm,
Nowadays, it's really more of a horror movie, the whole idea. And there are some people that get kind of weird, aren't real comfortable with the idea of that. How challenging writing today about someone who is possessed by seven demons, how challenging was that to write about that in a real way when our culture doesn't is not as accepting or as open to that idea?
yeah, our culture needs to wake up to it. I think it's a lot more happening than we want to admit.
Hmm.
Because in Jesus' day, when you stop and think about it, I've learned this since, when he came and he went in the wilderness, he defeated Satan after he was baptized. He defeated Satan with a word 3 times. Then he went off on his ministry, and the first thing he started doing was healing and casting out demons. He was getting rid of Satan and his minions, his all his followers from Israel, from any person who wanted deliverance, or whoever came was even near him and cried out, you're the Son of God, whatever. Maybe they didn't want deliverance because they were possessed. Why would they want to get out of the person? But he cast Satan out of every place he'd taken a foothold when he was here,
Hmm.
that at least enough that we noticed it was a real big deal, in
Yeah.
his day. How to portray it in Mary's case, I have no experience with demon possession. Um, so I contacted a group of authors that I'm friends with, and Bill Myers had written a little short book, an ebook that he pointed me to, and he'd actually had experience with casting out demons,
Oh,
not
wow.
himself, but with um, a couple other people, I think. And so reading that really helped me see how hard that was. It's Jesus could say it so easily, but humans don't always have that ability as quickly. It can be a battle, especially if they're filled with more than one.
Yeah.
Then I watched the movie Nefarious, which also showed a demon-possessed prisoner, which was pretty eye-opening. I mean, it wasn't a horror movie.
Hmm.
But it was horrible to think of. I mean,
Yeah.
satanic
Hmm.
oppression or possession is horrible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like something that I wouldn't take your kids to see it, but it was not something that like upset me to see like a horror movie would be. It wasn't blood and guts kind of thing. It was just showed the mind games of the demonic thinking.
Hmm.
And that's what I use to help me imagine what she was going through. Because a demon-possessed person doesn't have control of their body. If you look in scripture, the demons were casting them on in the fire, throwing them in the water, making them cut themselves, trying to make them kill themselves. I mean,
Yeah.
they weren't nice. They aren't nice.
No.
They and they lie, so people believe their lies. And what we don't realize today is there's so much deception and hatred in the world.
Hmm.
Do you not? And the biggest success Satan has had is make people think he's not real. He doesn't exist. Because if you don't think he exists, then you just make fun of all this stuff and don't realize that this is a spiritual world we live in.
Yeah.
It's not just what your eye can see. There is a dimension beyond us, and anyone who's had a near-death experience would probably agree with you. But
Yeah,
and
I know a few.
there is not just all good on the other side. The battle that goes on around us that we can't see is a spiritual one, and it's not that God and Satan are equal by any means, and
Yeah.
Satan knows his days are numbered. God will win in the end. He's
Mhm.
just allowing him to wreak havoc right now, and people are deceived more than they even know because deception, how do you know you're deceived?
Yeah,
And
that's part of the deception is you don't know that you were being deceived. If you knew you were being deceived,
it
you
wouldn't be
wouldn't be
deceived,
deceived.
right? Right. But only Jesus said, I'm the truth, and the truth will set you free. He sets us free. And if we don't believe the Bible's true, then we don't have, where else do we find truth? All truth is God's truth. If
Hmm.
it's true, it's from God. So we have to find God to really know the truth. But
Yeah.
it it was not fun necessarily, and
Hmm. Well,
it was
and
challenging.
that's mostly the first part of the book, but I would say that's not the main focus
No.
of the book. That was just a part of it, and I know that some people are like, I don't know that as far as nowadays and thinking about that. So I did want to touch on that, but that's not really your main crux of the book. And I would say with her story, what are you really hoping people take away from the story of Mary Magdalene? I'll specify
Well,
which Mary because there's lots of them in the Bible.
yeah, there's lots of them. Her devotion to Jesus and that, um, I mean, I had to give her ideal, like imagine what her motivations might have been or her feelings after being delivered might have been.
Hmm.
I think that I focused on fear because I think we can all relate to fear. Like, uh-oh, like why was she so devoted? There's some people who think that because the way the Gospels say how she went back to the tomb, that she may have gone three separate times. She was looking for Jesus. She saw the angels, and most people, when they see an angel, there was one. Mark says the women were shocked, but Mary saw them by herself, and she didn't like fall down dead out of fear. And maybe it's because of her past. I don't know. But she was weeping. And so I need to find my Lord. What did you do with him? Why? Why was she so in need of him? Because she knew he was going to die. She had to have been listening, but I'm not sure anyone connected that he was going to actually rise again.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be with him. And I think she may have feared that without him, she could go back to the way she was.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are delivered of alcoholism once they're saved and never have a problem the rest of their life. And others, it will be their lifelong struggle, you
Yeah.
know, or any other besetting sin. That's just an example.
Hmm.
And in her case, she could have just feared, that the demons could have come back, especially when other people around her were demon possessed, and she probably saw Jesus cast out other demons. But anyway, my
Yeah.
goal and my hope is people will see her devotion to Jesus and see how he set her free, truly and forever, once he rose from the dead. And just her love for him that, I mean, I want to have a love like that. I think we I want people to see Jesus through her eyes, through what was it like to be a female disciple, which was not something.
Yeah, not something that was done. And I love that when you really look at the stories of Jesus and the women that he interacted with, every single one of them, he honored them, he loved them, he respected them. If anybody was trying to, minimize or diminish or put them down, he said, no, that is not what you do. That is not how you treat women. And
Mhm.
and he loved them. And I love how you there was a scene in the book where she saw his eyes for the first time and she said the kindness and the love. And I know I shared with a friend of mine one time and I said, first of all, please don't get to know Christians because we're messed up. Get to know Jesus.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and that I imagine that he was able to look at people where he did just see them completely, warts and all, and still just love them. And they feel that, and they feel that love and acceptance. He's not going to leave them in the mess, but he's going to come alongside them and love them through it and love them right where they are, not waiting to be cleaned up first, but just
Right,
love them how they are. And I like how you mentioned his eyes and the kindness and how she really felt that love and acceptance. And that, yeah, Jesus did. He accepted women. He had women following him. He had women playing a major role in
major role.
his ministry and then going on into the New Testament. Women played a major role in establishing the church.
Yep.
And I like how that we're starting to recognize that again. We still have a ways to go, I think,
Yeah,
at
I think so.
times, but I think it's starting to become more commonplace.
Yeah. And I think I really like what you said about don't look at the Christian, look at Jesus. We are supposed to be light
Hmm.
bearers. We're supposed to be Christ followers. We're supposed to be pointing people to the truth. But I have grown up and seen so many, I don't know, I don't know, because I would fall, into this category.
I've messed up too.
Christians don't always give the best um, portrayal of who Jesus really is. Don't throw out Jesus with the church. Don't throw out Jesus because
Hmm.
you were wounded by someone calling themselves a Christian in the church. Because not everyone who goes to church is a believer. And even if they are not going to be perfect. And if you can't learn to look past that and realize you're just as much a sinner as they are. They're just, as someone has said, I don't know who, but Christians are beggars, just showing the other beggar where to find food, right? I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
and we don't do it very well. We might want to hang on to that bread and not share it, but we need to be what Jesus wants us to be. We want to be more like him, but we are going to fail people. And I just hate that people are throwing Jesus out with the truth.
Yeah.
He is the truth. They're throwing out Jesus because of the way we act and the way our churches act. And there's a lot of false teachers out there now, and it's really sad.
It is. It
Breaks
is.
my
It's
heart.
very, yeah. It's very disturbing to me, and it makes me sad when other people, some of the stories that I hear with church hurt and then too, you read about some of the Pharisees and the way they did. It was like, okay, some things haven't changed. I mean, some people get so locked into their rules. There's no room for love with that. Well, you mentioned before we started recording that you're going to be in the midst of that. So I would love for you to give us a little hint as to what you're working on next, so what we can keep our eyes out for after we get this one about Mary Magdalene's story, Dawn of Grace, or yeah, Dawn of Grace. I have that
Yeah,
right.
you guys.
What's the next thing we should look forward to from you?
Next year, I don't have the cover. It'll be a reveal later. I'm told I can share the title, but I haven't done it much. But the next book's on the woman at the well, and
Okay.
they've titled it A Deeper Well.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is the book I'll be editing about the time your podcast and radio show comes out. And I'm working at the on the third book in my contract about the Syrophoenician woman right now. And I don't have a title, even a working title on her. But I didn't have a working title
Okay.
on the last one either. I'm not great at titles, so
Well, that's okay. I'm sure the right title will come along when it's supposed to, as you're
well,
developing the story and everything else. So I trust it'll
actually
come.
Ravel does that for me a whole lot better than I do. So
Very good. Well, one of the questions I always like to ask is you have been able to pursue what you felt God calling you to do, and you're passionate and we're encouraged. What would you say to encourage someone else to pursue the passion that God has placed in their heart?
hmm. Make sure it's from God
Okay.
because so often we get a passion in life and maybe that's our bent. Maybe we really want to do XYZ. But make sure that it isn't you alone that wants it. If you are a Christ follower, you need to go to him first. You need to read the word, you need to understand the word, you need to know Jesus, you need to pray. And if that desire is from him, then you need to give it to him. You might need to give it up, but you need to let him decide if he's going to give it back once you surrender it to him.
Yeah.
Whether it's raising your children or it's pursuing some career, climbing the corporate ladder, or, becoming whatever, famous or not famous, whatever you want to do, you need to be doing what he created you to do. That's way more important than your passion.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Thank you so much. And Jill, if someone is interested in this book and some of your other books, connecting with you, your blog, what are some of the ways that people can connect with you?
Everything is on my website, JillEileenSmith.com.
Okay.
All my books are there, purchase links to buy it, excerpts to read, and some of them have study questions. Mary Magdalene's story, Dawn of Grace, has a U version
Okay.
devotion that people can down and go if you have the Bible app, U version. It's only 5 days. It fits right in right now with Easter, but we'll be past that by the time you
Yeah.
um, post this, but it's a good thing to listen to, and my journal's there and any news. Sign up for my newsletter. That's what I try to keep people informed quarterly. I'm not very good at writing newsletters very often, but you can
That's
sign
okay.
up for blog updates too.
Yeah, very good. Well, Jill, thank you. Thank you for your stories and your perseverance in keeping going because I've thoroughly enjoyed the books that I've read of yours so far and look forward to reading more. So
Well,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much. And thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.